We will now discuss problem 5-21 on page 220, which deals with the Stratford Company. And Stratford distributes a lightweight lawn chair that sells for $15 per chair. Variable costs are $6 a chair. Fixed cost total $180,000 per year. We were asked to answer questions 1, 2, 3, and 5 for this problem. And in order to do so, question number 1 says, what is the product's contribution margin ratio? Well, each shirt has a selling price of $15, variable cost of $6, contribution margin of $9. The contribution margin ratio is contribution margin divided by the selling price. Contribution margin is $9 divided by the selling price of $15. Contribution margin ratio is 60%. Likewise, the variable cost ratio, or variable expense ratio, is $6 divided by 15, or 40%. Part 2 of the problem then asks us to use that contribution margin ratio to determine the break-even point in sales dollars. The break-even point in sales dollars is fixed expenses divided by the contribution margin ratio. Fixed expenses in this problem, as given, are $180,000. Divided by the contribution margin ratio of 0.60 tells us that we need $300,000 of sales revenue to break even. Part 3 asks us the company estimates its sales will increase by $45,000 during the upcoming year due to increased demand. They want to know how much should net operating income increase as a result of that $45,000 of additional sales revenue. If you were to take the $45,000 of additional sales revenue multiplied by the 60% contribution margin ratio, you'll realize that there would be a $27,000 increase in contribution margin. Since fixed costs are not going to change at all, that increase in contribution margin will result in an increase in net operating income of $27,000. Part 5, the last of the 4 parts needed to answer this question, asks us to go back to the original data, and they say assume that the company sold 28,000 units last year. Sales manager is convinced that if he or she was to reduce the selling price by 10%, coupled with a $70,000 increase in advertising expenditures, they would increase the annual unit sales by 50%. We're asked to prepare 2 contribution format income statements, one showing the results of last year's operations, and one showing what the results of operations would be if these changes were made. And then finally they ask us the question, would you recommend that the company do as the sales manager suggests? Looking at the solution for part 5, we would look at the fact that last year when we sold 28,000 units, our sales revenue was $420,000. 28,000 times $15. Variable expenses, 28,000 times $6 per chair, $168,000. Contribution margin is the difference between the two of $252,000, less the fixed cost of $180,000. We would have net operating income of $72,000. If we were to decrease the sales price by 10%, pump an additional $70,000 into advertising, bumping up our fixed costs from $180,000 to $250,000, we would, as a result, sell 42,000 chairs. They told us that originally we were selling 28,000 chairs. If we were to increase the number of units sold by 50%, 50% of 28,000 is 14,000. That additional 14,000 units added on to the 28,000 would give us 42,000 chairs to be sold. Those 42,000 chairs at a selling price of $13.50 per chair would yield revenue of $567,000. The $13.50 selling price is the original $15 less 10%. We reduced the selling price by 10% or $1.50. Our new sales price is $13.50 per share. Our variable cost is $6 a share. Contribution margin $7.50 per share. At 42,000 units gives us a contribution margin of $352,000. From that, we subtract our fixed cost of $250,000. We end up with net operating income of $65,000. As a result, this change should not be made. As you can see, net operating income decreased from $72,000 down to $65,000. This concludes our discussion of problem 5-21, as well as our homework for last week's session.